notice that there's some incense around you strategically placed among the urine puddles. That's because we like to look at this poetry reading. It's kind of a combination of urine and African violet incense. It's kind of a mix, you know. So just think of it as burning urine, burning violet urine to set you free. I'm sorry, actually, for poets, I think urine should complement the squalor of their lives. Now, that's not true. Most poets that I've met are mostly white males, and God knows there's no shortage of those writers. But as poets, and a lot of times I'm going to do a bit of an improvisational critique here. Most of those white poet males seem to read poetry about the lower half of their bodies and the lower half of other people's bodies. Now, those poems I look at as a perspective and as anybody's, outlook on their lives. I said squalor, but that doesn't have to be squalor. But okay, thank you. We try to rise above. We try to rise above that. So, to all you white male poets who seem to excel and proliferate in the penis poems, as it were, the penis poetry, just remember, there's many eyes watching you closely, and listening to those chosen words. So today in the park, Saturday, we're going to listen closely, and this is to the penis poets especially. Let's try to go beyond that. Let's try to go beyond. John? Did you say John is here? Oh. All right. Okay, you all know who you are, and you all know who you're not. And my name is Matthew, and my partner is Michelle. We're going to guide you through this Saturday afternoon of poetry apocalypse, because that's what we got to do. That's what we're not paid to do, is to guide you along here and make sure that everything's okay. True, the poems will bounce off the trees, they'll bounce off the bricks, they'll bounce off those puddles of aforementioned urine, but look at that as a mind meld, a collection, a little dance in your head. And I say that anyone can write poetry. It's one thing that's very accessible. You got a blank piece of paper and a full pen or pencil. Anybody can sit down and write what they feel, what they don't feel, what they like, what they don't like. Sure, I've heard people read shopping lists, found poetry, box tops, TV guide, a well-chosen sentence, an address in a phone book. Anybody can write poetry. But then you start saying, well, is it good poetry? It's anyone's opinion. It's anyone's opinion. That's why in poetry we try to encompass the prose, the music, the ballads, the sages, the lunatic, fringe, of which there's no shortage. And don't get me wrong, white male poets, you're welcome here. You're welcome to read here. Anyway, our next performer is Johnny Stanton. And that was Greg Engelson, by the way. Johnny Stanton.
Thank you for your introduction. I'm going to read a story about a little kid I know called Initials in the Cement. I live on a nice block in New York City. The buildings aren't too big, and neither are the rents. You can say hello to people on the street with a minimum of embarrassment. There are trees on the block and several eccentrics. People clean up after their dogs, and kids actually live here and play in front of their stoops. Tyrone Powell Jr. was one such kid, but he was special in a sad way. His father was dead, he was a black in a white neighborhood, and he had been born into perpetual childhood. Most adults who knew him went out of their way to be kind and protective, and that included me. The first time I met him, I chased away a teenager because he was teasing the poor fool. Tyrone's mother lived across the street from me on the top floor of a walk-up building. She was recently up from the South, a hefty woman with sharp eyes. She worked as a cleaning lady and didn't take any shit from anybody. But if you were nice to her, Tyrone, she'd do anything for you. She once insisted on cleaning my bachelor apartment because I took him to the circus and a few other places. He was a big, strong 11-year-old, but in his mind he occupied that happy age of 5. His skin was the color of a coffee bean, except his hands which were white because they had been severely burned when he was a baby. He always played with the younger kids. This made some mothers nervous at first, but Tyrone, with his big eyes and shiny round face, could charm anyone. 4 to 7-year-olds were his favorite playmates. But his most favorite playmate was the pigeon lady, a crazy old woman who lived next door to me. She had buried her husband, her son, and 2 daughters. Every day, weather permitting, she walked up and down the block with a pot of breadcrumbs and birdseed, feeding the pigeons with Tyrone trailing behind her. She, or Tyrone, would throw a handful on the ground by the fire hydrants. There were 3 on the block. Then they would wait until the pigeons were full. If any crumbs were left, Tyrone would clean them up with a dustpan and broom that the pigeon lady had tied around her waist. I overheard her once in my hall telling Tyrone why his hands were white and the rest of his skin black. "You were someone else's baby when you were born. A woman like me, white, and your mother changed you, but God wouldn't let her. Finish the job. He made lightning strike your hands, and no amount of paint can cover them up." I opened my door, enraged, but one look at Tyrone told me he didn't understand a word she was saying. He smiled up at me and said, "Men doing something to your sidewalk. We cross a river to get here." 3 middle-aged Italians were redoing the sidewalk in front of my building. "Come on, Tyrone, let's go outside and watch," I said, taking his hand and giving the pigeon lady a look that should have changed her personality, but didn't. We sat on the stoop and stared at the men as they finished up. I put my arm around Tyrone's shoulder and he leaned against me. I wanted to protect him from anything bad for the rest of his life. The men climbed into their truck and drove away. I had a great idea. I said, "Tyrone, do you want to put your initials in the cement?" He thought about this with his hands like he was one of those Italians. Then he asked, "What initials?" "The first letters of your name. I'll show you." We both got excited. In front of my window, I live on the 1st floor. There's a fenced-in pit of concrete. I guided Tyrone's fingers as he traced the capital letters T.P. Then I circled them. When we were done, we stood back and admired our work. "Now that cement belongs to you, Tyrone Powell," I announced. "It sure do," he said. This happened in June. I spent that summer in Vermont, first teaching at the university, then writing in a backwoods cabin that belonged to a friend where I finished a novel I've been working on for 2 years. I came back home in the middle of October. The first thing I noticed as I climbed up my stoop was Tyrone's initials in the cement. Maybe tomorrow, I thought, I could take him to the park. I unpacked and did all those domestic things a fussy bachelor does to reclaim his apartment from its dark shadows. I opened all the windows and sat by the front one and looked out. I fell asleep in my chair, and it was the sound of scraping that finally woke me from my comfortable dream. I stood up and looked outside. There was a cold smell of clay in the air. A dirty, sandy-haired boy, around 6 or 7, was hunched over Tyrone's initials in the pit, rubbing his hands against them. I stuck my head out the window. "Hey, what are you doing?" He looked up. I didn't know him. He said, "Trying to get these marks off me, mister." He raised up his hands. There was a large dark spot on each of his palms. "Who told you to do that?" "The pigeon lady. She lets me help her feed the pigeons." "It figures," I said to myself, then asked the kid, "Doesn't Tyrone help her anymore?" "Who he?" "A black kid, kind of big. Those are his initials." I pointed down to them, then looked up at the Powell's apartment. The curtains on the window had disappeared. "She told me about him," the kid volunteered. "He be dead. His brains fell out. That's why rubbing my hands on his name can take off my black spots." "It won't help you, kid," I said. "You'll only hurt your hands and get you into trouble with your mother." "Oh, no," the kid said and stared at his hands as though they were visions. I felt this cruel sorrow in my heart, with not even a small glimpse of sunlight after the rain. And I saw a vision of you, Tyrone, fading, fading, never to appear again, except as initials in a circle of cement. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Don't be afraid. That was Johnny Stanton.